Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Fight Sites Combat Sports News Recap. I'm Iggy, and today we're going to go over some of the news that happened during the week, or at least those we deem substantially interesting to take note of, do a short recap of last week's event, and as well as preview the upcoming pay-per-view and touch upon some of the fights that had been announced over the last few days. Right, let's get it on. UFC on ESPN 21, Brunson versus Holland took place last weekend, characterized by a surprisingly large amount of knockouts with no submission victories and a couple of decisions. Max Griffin, Adrian Yanez, Grant Dawson and Bruno Gustavo da Silva were awarded Performance of the Night bonuses for their knockout victories over Song Kenan, Gustavo Lopez, Leandro Santos and JP Buys respectively. Montel Jackson, the bantamweight with heavyweight-sized hands, knocked out Jesse Strader, who came in at 137.5 pounds, missing weight by 1.5 pounds over the bantamweight non-title limit, and Taito Ivasa knocked out Harry Hunsucker, who came in as a late-notice replacement for Dante O'Mays, who had to be replaced for undisclosed reasons. Middleweight Trevin Giles, unanimous decision Roman Dolidze, Macy Chasson, or Chiason, I honestly can't quite recall, defeated Marion Renault, and Montserrat Conejo won her bout with Cheyenne Buys by unanimous decision as well. And naturally, Derek Brunson versus Kevin Holland was the main event that headlined UFC on ESPN 21, featuring the perennial middleweight contender Derek Brunson and the perennial divisional wacky meme man Kevin Holland. It happened. It headlined the event. Derek Brunson won the fight by unanimous decision, and Kevin Holland spent 25 minutes talking to Khabib, who was also present. Check out our Patreon to listen to Sriram's alternate commentary for the fight if you want a good laugh and wish to see Sriram's handsome face. It's only $3 to sign up, which also gives you access to most of the stuff we've done over the years. Free audio versions are also available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but honestly, I'd prefer to see Sriram's face for 40 minutes rather than this fight again, rather than 25 minutes of this happening. Moving on. Overall, not a bad card, strictly speaking, but nothing that will blow your socks off, I suppose. Most of the finishes owe themselves to the fighter's defensive deficiencies, as it often is. Others to bad fight IQ. Moving on. In recent news, Chatri Sichadong had recently announced that BJJ's premier golden boy, Golden Ryan, has signed with ONE for both grappling and MMA bouts. I suppose, if anything, Golden Ryan's recent antics have shown that he's ready for the latter. Look at the way he viciously bitch-slapped Andre Galvao in the hallway after his match. ONE couldn't help themselves, and in their announcement, they proclaimed Golden Ryan was the greatest BJJ grappler of all time, because everyone who signs with ONE is the greatest of all time in whatever it is they do, even if they've already signed another greatest of all time from that sport already. Khamzat Chimaev hinted at a possible return on his social media, remaining cryptic as always. Previously, he posted some alarming photos of what seemed to be a sink stained with his own blood, and his manager hinted at Khamzat's poor health, a result of a particularly grueling bout with COVID. Whether he's actually ready to return to MMA is yet to be seen, but if anything, regardless of how you feel about Khamzat as a person, his current situation is just another one of those reminders how the UFC brass should probably take COVID more seriously. With many bouts having been postponed or cancelled due to fighters testing positive, fighters are already putting their bodies under massive amounts of stress, and the idea that they're somehow immune to it because they're tough is just playing wrong. Case in point, Alexander Volkanovski is off UFC 260 due to a positive COVID test. Volkanovski was supposed to face Brian Ortega in the co-main, but a week before the event, he had to pull out. According to a post on his social media, Volkanovski tested negative before leaving Australia, negative before entering the UFC bubble, and positive once he was in, which raises further questions about the UFC safety protocols, with Volkanovski's mom raging about it on her own Instagram account, with some classy fans saying that she must be tripping for suggesting that the UFC would somehow fail in their duty to ensure their fighters' safety, something that they've already done many times over, with many fighters having been taken off their upcoming bouts precisely because of either COVID protocols or failing COVID tests. Here's hoping Volkanovski, one of the pound-for-pound best fighters currently on the UFC roster, maybe ever, won't have to face the same complications Chimaev had to face, because that would just be tragic. Volkanovski, on that topic, Volkanovski's teammate Shane Young also had to pull out of his fight against Omar Morales due to quote-unquote COVID protocols, which is the wording that's been used many times already, particularly, for example, when they used the same wording when the bout between Brad Riddell and Gregor Gillespie got scrapped the day of last week's event. In any case, this leaves us with the UFC 260 down a co-main with Tyron Woodley versus Vicente Luque, filling the spot. A few days ago, Luque went out of his way to state that Tyron Woodley remains a dangerous opponent, despite what many people are saying about him losing 15 straight rounds in a row. A nice gesture, if anything, quite in character for Luque, to remain complimentary of his opponent, especially with so many competitors opting to emulate McGregor and call his opponent a bum. Speaking of which, McGregor is in one of his moods again, and in one of his latest tweets, he disparaged Khabib Nurmagomedov's finishing ability, stating that the majority of Khabib's victories came by decision, which naturally begs the question of how come he got knocked down by Khabib in their fight. A particularly funny leap of logic, one that is not necessarily true but still incredibly amusing, is that Khabib cracked Conor's chin, which is why Dustin Poirier was able to knock him out. I mean, it's probably not true, but it's still funny to think about. Back to UFC 260. A rematch between Stipe Miocic and Francis Ngannou is thankfully still intact. The fight site's very own Julian Lung has recently recorded a fairly extensive pre-fight breakdown, which I highly recommend you check out on our main channel. In a nutshell, Stipe is pushing 40 and visibly slowing down after a grueling trilogy with Daniel Cormier, where Stipe had to absorb frankly absurd amount of damage. And while after a hiccup or two, Ngannou seemingly went back to what made him so feared in the first place, that is, bonking. To paraphrase Jules, this is exactly the same fight as the first fight, except Stipe is older and slower now, possibly less durable, while Francis is essentially the same fighter, except maybe even more aggressive than before, or at least he certainly seemed that way against Rosenstruck, where he spent the first minute of the fight kind of just being, well, not even a minute, the first few seconds of the fight just kind of standing around, and then he just basically ran at Rosenstruck. But in any case, if Stipe manages to pull this off, I'd say he'll have, without a doubt, cemented his status as one of the greatest ever. Other bouts are as follows: Sean O'Malley versus Thomas Almeida, Gillian Robertson versus Miranda Maverick, Jamie Malarkey versus Hammer Worthy. Featured prelim is William Knight versus Alfonso Menefield. Other bouts on the prelims are Jessica Penne versus Hannah Goldie, Jared Gooden versus Abubakar Nurmagomedov, and Modestas Bukauskas, the man with a universe in his eyes, if you check out his topology page, and Mikhail Alexeychuk, the man whose Wikipedia page has a mirrored image of his face instead of a normal one, the one where both sides of his face had been made symmetrical for whatever reason. I highly recommend you check it out. It looks very funny. And then the early prelims on Fight Pass only have Marc-Andre Barriault versus Abu Azaita, who has apparently been signed, apparently has been signed back with the UFC after his escapade with his brother, where he tried to sneak in some of his buddies within the UFC bubble. Supposedly, some political pressure had been applied to get him and his brother back on the roster, which is something that I think Karim Zidane may have written something about this, but can't rightly say right now. Can't exactly say right now with any degree of surety. Anyway, notable announcements. Apparently, Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor is a sure thing now, scheduled to headline UFC 264 on July 10. Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler is also a thing, scheduled to headline UFC 262, thus leaving Justin Gaethje with nothing to do for the time being. With Justin Gaethje expressing his bewilderment on Twitter the other day, saying that he was apparently in the middle of a full camp, in the middle of a full-blown preparation to face Michael Chandler, and here we are. And Ryan Hall will finally fight a guy in Ilia Topuria on UFC 264, the same card that is the card that is headlined by Poirier McGregor. And maybe after this, people will stop insisting that everyone is ducking Hall. But who knows, it may just get postponed or canned due to COVID. July is still a ways off. In fact, anything can happen to any of these fights, so honestly, I'd do the same I've been doing for this whole year. And that is, until these fighters are actually in the cage facing each other and getting punched in the face by each other, I don't believe this is happening. Well, I suppose that's it for today, folks. Check out our website for analytical content and written breakdowns. Subscribe to our Patreon to get things like Ed Gallo's 5-part career retrospective of George St. Pierre, alternate commentary tracks, and exclusive breakdowns of various fighters requested by our patrons. All of this becomes available for as little as $3 per month, and for $5 you gain access to our Discord, where you can talk to like-minded fight fans and join a tightly knit community of fellow fans of the sport. Check out our main YouTube channel for fight breakdowns, short and pre-fight panel discussions, with a panel on Miocic versus Ngannou 2 coming up next. Peace.